Welcome to the Headley Highlight Show's Headley Headspaces. And this headspace is called Canada's Mark Carney says the quiet bit out loud. The rules-based order never really existed. And the hegemonic power has turned on us. So before I jump into my headspace, which is called Canada's Mark Carney said the quiet bit out loud. The rules-based order never existed. And the hegemonic power now has turned on us. I want to say thank you to everyone who's been liking, sharing, commenting on my headspaces and on my channel. Don't forget to click the bell notification and select all, and you'll get all of my uploads. You can donate, like, comment, and share. I'm very partial to 3 wings and chips and a bit of Bitcoin. You might want to buy some American stocks. I understand they took a battering on Tuesday. All these things will be welcome. Thank you in advance of your cooperation. Right, let's jump straight in. So this headspace is called Canada's Mark Carney said the quiet bit out loud. The rules-based order never really existed, and the hegemonic power has now turned on us. Now, the reason I wanted to start with this is that the Economic Forum, the World Economic Forum, is meeting again for its 20th year. And we can thank the World Economic Forum for bringing us absolutely zero benefit in our lives. What they have also done is created an environment where nobody owns anything. All the policies that have been pursued, especially around local government, hence the reason why so many members of our government and various European governments and other governments rock up to Davos. So aside from my general dislike at the globalist forum, which is the European Economic Forum, Mr. Mark Carney, who is a globalist himself, previously the Bank of England CEO, shoehorned into the position of being Prime Minister of Canada. He didn't even have a seat in any of the chambers. Talk about keeping it in the club. Suddenly has realized that the hegemonic power, namely the United States, has now turned its aggression on its alleged allies. And this was what his speech was about at Davos. Mr. Carney made mention of the fact, and I'm going to play certain excerpts of the speech, that the rules-based order was scantily applied only to those who were foes of that situation or the people they wanted to punish. And when I heard this, what that made me think about was all of those countries who have been hauled in front of various courts, and the way in which the UN and the institutions of the rules-based order have essentially been used to create more power for the biggest, most powerful individual countries on the planet, namely the United States. And where I have little sympathy now for the Europeans and the Canadians, especially those Canadians in the body politic of Canadians, not ordinary Canadian people, of course, but the elites and that sort of political structure in Canada and in Europe, is that they sat back for decades while America's aggression was weaponized for their own needs in other parts of the world. They were comfortable with other people's lands, their resources, their political, cultural, and social capital being consumed under the weight of American hegemony, interfering in their countries, destabilizing their governments, creating civil unrest and importing terrorism. Those Europeans who are now squealing like a collection of piglets on a farm, I don't have any sympathy for them, because they were more than happy to export that barbarism to others. And now we're all squealing because it's now being visited upon you. And this is the backdrop to Mark Carney's speech at Davos. The backdrop is President Trump's speech the next day, which I'm going to do in another headspace afterwards, about the position of America and what America has been doing, according to his perception, for the world, and for the world not being grateful for it. This is Mark Carney's response to that. And what he says, in a nutshell, is Many countries were complicit in barbarism, brutality, regime change, because they benefited from it. But now that barbarism has turned on them, namely with the conduct of America most recently and way back in 2019 when they said they wanted Greenland. He condenses for me the real reality, which I have been talking about ever since I have been doing my political shows, that the incumbent administration in America have absolute contempt for the Europeans. And they feel as if the United States, in the words of Donald Trump, is keeping the world afloat and safe. And it's now time for payback. However, what Mr. Carney picks up in his speech is that the trade-off of security for compliance, as well as integration into a almost like a single global entity, and let's not forget he's a globalist, has become weaponized as a weakness. Political, fiscal, and cultural integration he now sees as being weaponized against anybody who's standing up to the main hegemonic power. And basically what he means is the US, America. Because if America is successful, and it will be successful, in taking Greenland, I can assure you, Canada is next. With or without the Monty Ice Force deployed all over the border.
Era of great power rivalry, that the rules-based order is fading, that the strong can do what they can and the weak must suffer what they must. And this aphorism of Thucydides is presented as inevitable, as the natural logic of international relations reasserting itself. And faced with this logic, there is a strong tendency for countries to go along to get along, to accommodate, to avoid trouble, to hope that compliance will buy safety. Well, it won't. So what are our options? In 1978, the Czech dissident Václav Havel, later president, wrote an essay called The Power of the Powerless. And in it, he asked a simple question: how did the communist system sustain itself? And his answer began with a greengrocer. Every morning, this shopkeeper places a sign in his window: "Workers of the world unite." He doesn't believe it. No one does. But he places the sign anyway to avoid trouble, to signal compliance, to get along. And because every shopkeeper on every street does the same, the system persists. Not through violence alone, but through the participation of ordinary people in rituals they privately know to be false. Havel called this living within a lie. The system's power comes not from its truth, but from everyone's willingness to perform as if it were true. And its fragility comes from the same source. When even one person stops performing, when the greengrocer removes his sign, the illusion begins to crack. Friends, it is time for companies and countries to take their signs down. For decades, countries like Canada prospered under what we called the rules-based international order. We joined its institutions, we praised its principles, we benefited from its predictability. And because of that, we could pursue values-based foreign policies under its protection. We knew the story of the international rules-based order was partially false.
That is very important, and the reason it's very important is because it's coming from someone who was a banker. He understands that the rules-based order around finance was false, that the bank potentially or financial markets were doing things not based because of rules, but because of the strength of particular hegemonic powers. And now he's in government in Canada. And he's basically saying, we all know that it was a falsehood, but we all went along with it because we benefited directly from it. So what does that tell you about the rest of the world and how it operates? They're not interested in justice and rules. They're interested in being a beneficiary of a system, invariably, for quite a lot of the time, for power and for money, basically. It's a very simple analogy, but that's what he's saying. They went along with it. Why? Because they benefited from it. They could pursue certain policies as a consequence of that. And then that allowed them to effectively not call out what they should have called out. And he makes reference to that here.
That the strongest would exempt themselves when convenient. That trade rules were enforced asymmetrically. And we knew that international law applied with varying rigor depending on the identity of the accused or the victim.
That's very important because he says it right there. It depends on who the person is and who the law is, how the law is applied. So think about Mugabe. Think about Gaddafi. Think about all of those people who you've seen in front of The Hague and whether or not it was a case of them actually being tried for just reasons or for the powers and the agendas of the powerful.
This fiction was useful. And American hegemony in particular helped provide public goods, open sea lanes, a stable financial system, collective security, and support for frameworks for resolving disputes. So we placed the sign in the window. We participated in the rituals. And we largely avoided calling out the gaps between rhetoric and reality. This bargain no longer works. Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Over the past 2 decades, a series of crises in finance, health, energy, and geopolitics have laid bare the risks of extreme global integration. But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons.
This is the hypocrisy of leaders such as Mark Carney. How many sets of sanctions has there been on Cuba for however long, Mr. Carney? You're just talking here about how great powers use their infrastructures as weapons. How many sanctions have there been on Cuba, on China, on Russia, on African nations? And what did you do? You were silent because you had your sign, just like the rest of those other leaders, in the window because you were happy to participate. But once again, like I've said, now that the brutality is facing you, you have to recalibrate because for you, it's a rupture. But for all of those countries that faced all of that intervention and interference, their rupture happened many summers ago. And for many of them, they're still not in recovery. So there's no sympathy for you, Mr. Carney, coming from me.
Financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination. The multilateral institutions on which the middle powers have relied, the WTO, the UN, the COP, the architecture, the very architecture of collective problem solving are under threat. And as a result, many countries are drawing the same conclusions, that they must develop greater strategic autonomy in energy, food, critical minerals, in finance and supply chains. And this impulse is understandable. A country that can't feed itself, fuel itself, or defend itself has few options. When the rules no longer protect you, you must protect yourself. But let's be clear-eyed about where this leads. A world of fortresses will be poorer, more fragile, and less sustainable. And there's another truth. If great powers abandon even the pretense of rules and values for the unhindered pursuit of their power and interests, the gains from transactionalism will become harder to replicate. Hegemons cannot continually monetize their relationships. Allies will diversify to hedge against uncertainty. They'll buy insurance, increase options in order to rebuild sovereignty. Sovereignty that was once grounded in rules but will increasingly be anchored in the ability to withstand pressure. This room knows this is classic risk management. Risk management comes at a price. But that cost of strategic autonomy, of sovereignty, can also be shared. Collective investments in resilience are cheaper than everyone building their own fortresses. Shared standards reduce fragmentations. Complementarities are positive sum. And the question for middle powers like Canada is not whether to adapt to the new reality. We must. The question is whether we adapt by simply building higher walls or whether we can do something more ambitious.
So now what Mr. Carney wants to do is to reach out to all those people who, where he used to have the sign in the shop window saying that we're going along with whatever the hegemonic power is saying, we now would like a partnership. So do you see the hypocrisy here? In addition, Mark Carney has just come back from China on bended knee, I'm sure, to Mr. Xi Jinping and the Communist Party, who run the most successful mixed economy on the planet. They've just brought down the tariffs on Chinese electric cars to 3% from 100%. And he did say he has one of the largest collections of reserves in oil, which they're hoping now will be even more protected because Mr. Carney has employed more troops with their boots on the ice in and around the area. They've invested in submarines and they've invested in some aircraft. But I think he hit the nail on the head because for 20 years, the Davos set, the globalist set, which Mr. Carney is very much ensconced in, was very happy with the integration because, like he said, they were all complicit in the lie of an international rules-based order with structures such as the structures we have, WTO, the UN, the EU, ECOWAS, CARICOM, all of those structures, they were all benefiting from it. But now what's happened is there is a rupture, as he said. It's not a transition, it's the end of and the beginning of something else. And within this context, Mr. Carney, with his political elite powers within Canada, would like to recalibrate. And I have little or no sympathy for any of them. They gorged themselves on the suffering of others when the brutality was faced in the opposite direction. Now that it's facing them, they want to win friends and family and influence. Well, we'll see how that goes, I'm sure. Given that Mr. Trump is more than likely to have a third term, Mr. Carney and his associates, I think, need to invest a little bit more in shoring up their border defenses. Because it doesn't matter how many Monties you deploy. If Mr. Trump has his eye on your particular block of ice, it looks like all your efforts are just going to melt in the midday sun. I know that was a terrible joke, but I had to do something. So that's my thoughts about Canada's Mark Carney says the quiet bit out loud, that the rules-based order never existed and the hegemonic power is now turning on those who supported it all the way through. It's turned on them. So what do you think? Do you agree with me that Mr. Mark Carney and all the other beneficiaries of America's jackboot foreign policy should receive absolutely no sympathy? They also deserve to cough up because they've been basically utilizing America as a cash cow and not paying proper reciprocal tariffs, or should I say payments? Or do you feel sorry for the Europeans? Do you think I'm being harsh because I am not waving the flag of, oh dear, we don't have any friends, let's turn around and see if we can make some new ones? Give me your thoughts, your 2 pence, your 3 cities, or your declining dollar price. Don't forget to make a donation. Yes, this was a long one, but then you know what I'm saying, you've got to chew the fat with these things. See you next week, darlings, and cut!